Talk Show. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we continue our Werewolves of Summer retrospective, a return to classic werewolf movies, some you've heard of, some you have not, with Neil Jordan's 1984 The Company of Wolves, starring Angela Lansbury, actually, and David Warner. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have, so warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, creator of the Alex Van Helsing novels. With me from Austin is Mr. Drew Edwards, writer for Rockabilly Online, creator and writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man. Say hello, Drew.
Hello, Drew.
Hello. And from Los Angeles tonight, Adam Foshko, writer and creative consultant for Activision's Call of Duty Exozombies, the explosive new episodic Zombie Fest starring John Malkovich, Bill Baxton, John Bernthal, Rose McGowan, and Bruce Campbell, as well as screenwriter for the upcoming Skylanders Superchargers due out later this year. Say hello.
How are y'all?
How are we? We're fine. We're doing wonderfully. And finally, also joining us from Denver, as always, color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman. Say hello.
Howdy. It's my turn to say howdy.
It is indeed.
We have to represent Tony in his absence.
I know. We're missing Tony. We're missing his Texas howdy. So
I miss the Buenos Aires.
Oh yeah. I trade them out. Sometimes it's
all right.
Different things. I try to keep things fresh.
Okay. According to Wikipedia, The Company of Wolves is a 1984 British Gothic fantasy horror film. Boy, you're in for something when you have that many adjectives before the word film.
Yeah.
Directed by Neil Jordan and starring Sarah Patterson, Angela Lansbury, Stephen Rea, and David Warner. It was written by Angela Carter and Neil Jordan. The film is based on the werewolf story of the same name, The Company of Wolves, and Angela Carter's short story collection, The Bloody Chamber. And Carter herself co-wrote the screenplay with Jordan based on the story and an earlier adaptation of The Company of Wolves for radio. And I haven't actually heard the radio version, but I'm curious about that. Like what, in 1984, I'm wondering what show she might have done that for. So let's get our opening thoughts. Let's go Drew, Julia, Adam, and I'll go. Drew, you're responsible for programming this particular retrospective of werewolf movies. You've chosen this film from 1984. Why does somebody who wants to know about werewolves in the movies, why do they put this on their card, and what's here? Why are we here?
Okay. I'm going to preface everything I'm about to say that I do think, even though this is a film I enjoy, I do think it is flawed. I think it is at times pretentious, and at many times they choose style over having a complete narrative. That being said, this is 1984. We've had the 1-2 punch of American Werewolf in London and The Howling, which we discussed last week. So the rules of werewolf movies, as we have had them for decades before this, have been basically blown off the table. So everybody is free to kind of make whatever the hell they want in werewolf cinema. This is a movie that exemplifies that in so many ways. It is a very surreal film. It's a very beautiful film at times, even if at times it doesn't make a lick of sense. And it's got some really, really interesting visuals. The visual of the man opening up his mouth and the wolf muzzle coming out, that seems to be the thing that everybody remembers about this particular film. And I think that's a really great image in werewolf cinema on a whole. This is more a cult classic than an outright classic, but I chose to do this over one of the Howling sequels because I feel like it gives you a lot to talk about, especially how much werewolf movies had changed after the Howling.
Interesting. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Julia, The Company of Wolves. I assume this is your first time watching it, and tell us your opening thoughts.
It is indeed first time watching it. Drew, I love you so much, but I really don't appreciate you making me watch this movie. I was
Just
not
glad I didn't make you watch The Howling too. That you would have been more. You would have been. There would have been no amusement in your voice if we'd gone that route.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, there have been some. No, I mean, I love Angela Lansbury, so that was good. I don't know, it just felt so just weird, and like the whole dream within a dream thing, didn't really work for me the way they did it here, and I don't know, it wasn't my favorite.
Right, and just before we go on, for the listener, the movie is this interesting sort of Russian doll's nest of dreams
nesting dolls, yeah.
Stories. Yeah. So, thank you very much. Adam, what are your thoughts on The Company of Wolves?
How much time have we got? Okay, so I know we're keeping this short. Look, I'm going to say right now this is a rare picture, okay? It's rare not just in the kind of meat that's being bandied about the screen, but it's people tearing their faces off. It's rare because it's a film, particularly in this genre, that I've never seen before. So that's already really unusual. And it's a really bizarre mix of elements. So I was really coming at it with fresh eyes. It was really reminiscent of, this, I call it the 4 rooms of lycanthropy. Sort of like, it's that kind of a picture that has some multiple vignettes that kind of are strung along with some sort of a thin narrative. In this case, the girl dreaming and everything else. It's got elements of Little Red Riding Hood. It's sort of like Garden of Terror, or Tales from the Crypt, that kind of picture, but with werewolves. And it's such a peculiar mix of all these different things. The treatment of Little Red Riding Hood, the overtones and allegories for sex, and a girl blossoming into womanhood. All these sorts of things. It's such a mishmash of stuff, and it's so incredibly cemented in 1984 that I have to say it would be really easy to dismiss, probably, as just being weird and kind of bizarre, almost experimental in a lot of ways. And I would call this a film more than I would a picture, Julia. This is definitely a film. But the thing about it is...
What's the difference between a film and a picture for people who might be turning in for the first time?
Well, I think a film has the opportunity to have a tremendous amount of license in it. It can be experimental. It can be, Ridley Scott will sometimes dip down into the film sort of area. It'll be a little bit more, not highbrow, but it'll have more elements to it that will be more artistic. It'll take a lot more license. A picture is something that's going to feel like it's a more traditional, not a tentpole kind of thing, but it is a much more mass market, much more of a traditional kind of show that feels like it's got a discrete beginning, middle, and end. You're not going to expect a whole lot of real surprises with like a strange narrative or the Russian nesting dolls. It'll be kind of it'll be a lot straighter, and it'll be a lot more put together, and probably be a little more finely polished. I think this is held back a lot probably by its budget, and it feels very much more like an experimental film, a lot more like a personal film than a picture that gets released to theaters that feels very well put together. You know what I mean? One feels
like
a lot
when
more
Jack Palance tells The Tonight Show, "Hey, I've got to get out there and sell my next picture." There's a feeling of it's more artistic than the word movie, but it's still definitely a commercial endeavor.
Completely right. And a film is always going to be, in my opinion, a little bit more. I won't say highbrow, but it's gonna have more artistic elements to it. I think. I tend to, if you look at, A Tree of Life. That's definitely a film. That's not a picture, and it's definitely not a movie. It's definitely a film.
This is such a fun nomenclature. This idea of
I know Adam classes up our podcast.
Films, right? Film, picture, and movie, like 3 funnels that if you have a bunch of little billiard balls with the names of motion pictures on them, you could pick it up and go, all right, Gone with the Wind. Is this a film, a picture, or a movie?
Well, and you can, if you look at,
It's like that SNL things they used to do with the geek, nerd, or spaz, or whatever it was.
Yes.
Well, and you know, Jurassic Park, or even Jurassic Park Lost World, or even in our genres, you know, Fright Night from the 1980s. That's a movie.
Yeah.
You know, those are movies. Those feel like
Yeah.
movies. Those are really strong. Those are not pictures necessarily. Schindler's List is going to be a picture. You know, it's going to be. It's all just
Nobody
a
ever
little bit
talks
different.
about a Lifetime film.
Lifetime picture.
Right.
But this is
Okay,
definitely a film, but it has its own charm, and I think that's the thing too. It'd be really easy just to kind of go look at a bunch of allegories, and it's kind of a mishmash, and you know, it has some of the most amazing original transformations that I'd seen, and it was very cool to see. I'm not a giant fan of the narrative structure. A lot of elements in it I found sort of confusing, or you know, not tedious, but it made me think about it too much. Like, what does this mean exactly? Why am I okay? But you know what? It got made, and I like Neil Jordan, and he certainly went on to make some great, we'll say, pictures. But this is definitely one of those that I was glad that I saw, but I don't feel it has to be in my rotation.
Right. No, understood. You know, and Neil Jordan, this is a major director. I mean, this is the guy. I mean, although the last movie I watched with him that I really enjoyed was the Brave one. You know, the one with oh God, now I've blanked on the star. But anyway, it was
Jodie
basically
Foster?
Yeah, it was Jodie Foster. It was a remake of Death Wish with Jodie Foster, essentially. You know, but he did The Crying Game. I mean, he's done a lot of really.
And within our own corner of things, he did Interview with a Vampire, and then later Byzantium.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Very stylish director. And this is a very stylish picture, you know, even if it's 1984. But
Well, it looks a bit like a Duran Duran video at times. It has to.
It does.
Without
Right. It's on the reason it looks like that. Okay, just to set this, you know, but I'll skip my opening impression because my main the only thing I'll say is that Adams nailed it. This movie is essentially a werewolf anthology that just has a framing device that doesn't feel quite like the framing devices that you saw in the Amicus pictures. But it has a main narrative and a second main narrative, and then a bunch of short stories that it pops in. And I think probably the introduction of the second main narrative is one of the things that is a little disorienting for people watching an anthology. But you know, let's get right into it. And there's really only like you know, the outline can have just like 4 points, so we can just walk through the story and then comment on what we're seeing as we go. Okay, the movie opens up with not on a sound stage, on a very sort of wonderful practical set, you know, where it's today at a very, very wealthy house, and you have a wealthy mom and dad. David Warner is the father, and we meet the older sister who goes upstairs to pound on the door of the younger sister who's sleeping. And the younger sister is the lead of the movie. It's Sarah Patterson, and she's, you know, whatever she is. She's 12. Yeah. So she's 12 years old, and she's sleeping as her sister pounds on the door. And the sister is giving her a hard time because she's been stealing her makeup, which is this, you know, sort of thing that prepubescent girls do.
And older girls.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, and it has to do with childishness, rebellion, and also you know, a sexual exploration of trying on, you know, an older self and makeup and so forth. Anyway, that's the frame story. Pounding on the door, and the girl is sleeping. So now we go into the past, where we meet these exact same actors. Sarah Patterson is now a young girl in what I take to be sort of the Middle Ages. It's kind of a fairy tale world. I mean, what is this universe that we go into?
Oh, I
mean, it's a dream world.
It's ambiguous. I mean, it's a fairy tale forest
right.
that's overrun with German shepherds that are supposed to be wolves.
They're actually not. They're the Belgian shepherds they're dyed.
But there's a village. I mean, there's a village.
There's a village, and David Warner is there, and the sister's there, and the sister is wandering through the woods, but there's like these oversized mushrooms, and there's dolls and teddy bears, so there's like these little fragments of the girl's room in this forest.
At this point in the narrative, the physical things that are surrounding the little girl who's sleeping in the present time are melting into the narrative.
And they're big, and they're trying to grab her. That was actually kind of a fun scene. That made me laugh.
Yeah, she's being hunted by the
very Alice in Wonderland
sailor doll and the teddy bear and stuff like that. Okay, now right away, one weird thing is that because this is a dream world that we're in, then throughout the entire film, my feeling, because very quickly we're going to introduce the rest of the family and the grandmother and so forth, but nothing matters, because through the whole, that you're already in you're in the dream world, and so therefore weird shit can happen, and that it doesn't count for anything. There's a mink stole or whatever it is on the grandma's door, and or a weasel or whatever she's stuck up there, just a dead thing. But periodically it'll get up and like move its head around like a Muppet, and this doesn't mean anything because we're in a dream, and it means, which kind of to me either took the suspense out of it, or it just made me aware, this is a movie that's not wanting me to feel any suspense. It's just presenting me with like a folk tale in a sense.
I somewhat agree with you, but there's plenty of movies where they make dreams count. It's all in it. I don't quite think this one pulls that off.
What's funny is I think that they actually are setting us up to believe that dreams don't count because, and you'll get to this later, because of the end. I think there's a whole thing where it's like, let's disarm them and let them think that this is just surreal and Freudian and all kinds of other stuff. I could picture Neil Jordan going, we'll let them think it's a dream and it'll just be fanciful and it'll be very, very surreal and very interesting. And then they'll think, okay, there are no stakes and it'll be fine. They'll be prepared for anything. We can get as wild as we want. And then, then we can hit them with something at the end. So I kind of felt that was not meta.
No, you're not wrong. I mean, they do kind of pull the rug out from under you at the final moment.
We'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that. I think that's where I came at it from.
Yeah, and so let's return to that also when we get to a later scene with the huntsman and stuff like that, when you realize, things don't mean the same thing they would mean in a narrative that's supposed to be taking place in our world, I think. In the same way that folk tales often don't mean the same thing. But
I think the dream aspect of it is, just a doorway into the sort of fairy tale style. Because one of the ways I take it is, the post 1981 horror film universe, honestly, we can go back, the post Texas Chainsaw Massacre Halloween universe, or horror movie universe, I should say, took place in the present day. It wasn't like the things that Hammer was, where it lived in this sort of gothic world. So to really have people accept the sort of world that they were wanting to build here, and I should have mentioned this in my intro, that the sets were designed by Anton Furst, who went on to do the Tim Burton Batman.
Yes, he did.
So they're very striking. But people, I think, in 1984 weren't really ready to see this sort of gothic universe again without having some kind of context to put it in. And that's kind of why I wonder, other than the fact that, you can play with a lot of visuals and psychology using dream logic, but I also kind of wonder, it's like, hey, we want to do this sort of, gothic universe, but will people accept that if we don't show them at least a little bit of present day? Because that's,
oh my gosh, can you imagine, Drew? Like, imagine if like, say, Horror of Dracula, all right, which takes place in a Gothic universe. And I think in the late 50s that it was also not a period when people were seeing a lot of Gothic horror, because that kind of unleashed it, right? So imagine if you had opened that with Michael Gow and the woman playing his spouse in like 1950s doctor's office, and she's being put under the knife for something or other, and they put the gas thing on her face, and he goes, okay, well, you can dream now, and then she closes her eyes, and then they go, the horror of Dracula, and now we zoom back to the Gothic era.
Suddenly you're in Transylvania. Well, I mean, even Universal even kind of did this in did exactly what you're talking about in Bride of Frankenstein. They set up the whole thing.
Right.
Set up the whole thing is like, okay, what you're watching is a fantasy world.
But that was a setup, though. They didn't keep coming back to it. That was the other thing.
No, I know. I know. I mean, it's different, but I kind of wonder if there was discussion on it, because horror films were not set in this sort of, you know, ambiguous past anymore in the 1980s. They were set in the present. Monsters were in our backyard. You know, we didn't need Transylvania anymore.
Although I have a quick question. It's more of an open question. That is, it definitely has a lot of horror elements in it, and I don't dispute that. But when you consider that, I don't know, it's very surreal, and a year later, Legend came out. Do you think that this has more fantasy elements to it, by and large, with a mix of horror, of course, and that somehow is the thing that, you know, it's the struggle between fantasy and horror that we're sort of seeing.
I mean, the two genres are so interrelated. Like, this is something we've discussed on other podcasts, but the two genres are so related to each other. And to me, it's you know, it's almost pointless.
Super hot in the 80s. I mean, I think you know, you're totally right, Drew. This
is a movie where a guy rips his face off and turns into a werewolf. So ultimately, this is marketed as a horror film.
Yes. But the thing is, if you think of like all the other fantasy stuff going on, all the Beastmaster and all that crap, and D&D had a cartoon on. So having it does have a very D&D look to it in a sense. I love, by the way, the fact that I kept telling Julia it reminded me of Brigadoon, though, because this medieval forest where this village is, basically there's only a couple sets. There's the granny set. There's the where the young lady goes to spend a lot of her time with her grandmother on the other side of the woods. There's the woods, and there's the village square. And all of this, I say it reminds me of Brigadoon because it is so clearly a stage. I love it. Frankly, in many ways, I like the heightened reality of a stage more than I like practical sets many times because it feels, well, I mean, it feels like a complete fantasy world, you know, like that, because it's asking you to kind of fill in the rest of the stage for you. Like, imagine then if George Lucas had made this, or if Neil Jordan decided, I want to take $18 million and do a special edition of this where we're going to clean up these stages and like give it like, you know, infinite background so that you could always see far into the back and you know, and it wouldn't give it any more charm. To me, there's a charm to the staginess of stuff, you know, but I also don't mind wires on rubber bats, so, you know, who knows.
Well, especially in a movie about a dream. I mean, the staginess is dreamy in a lot of ways. Right, precisely. And you can take that really far. I mean, there are directors who, like Lars von Trier, will go ahead and put an entire film on something that physically looks like a stage, where you know, he'll show you the tape on the floorboards where the actors are going to hit their marks.
Yeah.
You know, and that's too far for me. But I like sort of this level. Okay, so anyway, we go into the medieval world, and
wait. Speaking of Lars von Trier, may I say that I like this film? I'm sorry, I like this film way more than I liked Melancholia. I just want to say that.
Melancholia. Which one is that?
You know, Adam, I think you may like this movie more than I do, and I like this movie quite a bit.
I like it way more than I like Melancholia. I just want to say that.
That is the one that where it all takes with James Caan, where it all takes place on a stage, isn't it?
No, that one. This one is with Kiefer Sutherland and and the world's going to end, and it's a Lars von Trier thing. And
oh God, no, I didn't. I mean, no disrespect, but no, I didn't see that one either.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the one that's ostensibly a crime drama, but it takes place on a giant soundstage, and it looks like, there are little sets, and they're separated by soundstage, and the camera sort of swoops from one to the next.
Oh yeah, no, I get it.
It's like Lars von Trier's Our Town in a sense. I don't remember what the movie was called, but anyway. So, and I'll figure it out before we're done recording. But okay, so we go back into the Middle Ages. The teenage daughter is basically just a plot point. This is the first example of many in this thing, where things that would be devastating in real life are just plot elements that push the story along in almost a folkloric sense. The older daughter is murdered, and so now
she's not murdered. She's devoured by wolves.
Yeah, she's eaten by wolves. Although
it's an important point.
Yes,
but she looks perfectly pristine in the box.
Yeah, no, that's true. So we can presume that she had all kinds of damage to her torso, which is not seen. Her head's fine. Anyway, so they bury her, and now the young lady becomes the older girl of the house, and it falls to her to start to spend more time and also take pressure off her mom.
And at the funeral, there's this boy that sticks his tongue out at her, and he ends up playing a significant role.
Right. So we also meet the other boy of the village who is flirting with her, but he's in a very boyish way. It's very sort of silly and childlike. So this is how we introduce Angela Lansbury, because Sarah Patterson now goes to visit with Angela Lansbury, who starts to tell her, who kind of introduces her to the mysteries of this world that we're showing us, because the first thing that Grandma starts doing is telling the first of several werewolf stories that will be presented. And when a story gets presented in this movie, we cut to that story within the story. And so now we're like 3 narratives deep, because in 1984, there's a girl who's sleeping. In the fantasy Middle Ages, there's a girl who's talking to her grandma, and now somewhere deeper in the Middle Ages, there is the first one, it's a young married couple.
It's a girl who married a traveling man whose eyebrows meet. It's very important to keep, which is actual werewolf folklore. They keep talking about how, never trust a man whose eyebrows meet, because
Angela Lansbury has some wonderful little things that you're not supposed to trust. I just love them. That was the eyebrows meet. She's born on Christmas Day, and he's born feet first, and for sure he's the devil or whatever.
Never trust a naked man in the woods. And all of this is actual werewolf folklore.
I mean, I know, I wouldn't trust.
This isn't. Well, but none of this is made up. That's the beautiful thing is the people. Neil Jordan and his co-writer, they did do their research on werewolf folklore, which I appreciate.
Sure.
But the story they set up is this woman has married this guy who's a traveler, and on their wedding night, he hears wolves howling, and he tells her he has to go before they can consummate their marriage, he tells her that he has to go pee in the yard, and he just never comes back.
Well, he specifically says, I have to answer the call of nature.
Yeah.
It's such a wonderful double entendre here about going out to pee and also answering the call of nature. There are wolves calling, and he's going to go do that for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so he disappears. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, the next, she waits a while, and he never comes back, so she marries another guy and has a couple of kids. And then, one night, she gets a knock at the door, and here is her first husband, all dirty and grungy, and, but acting like he just got done and came back in. He comes into the house, kind of glares at the kids, and then asks her to fix him dinner, like nothing has happened, and
he calls her a whore.
He calls her a whore and starts screaming at the kids and her, and then proceeds to begin to pull his face off and one of the
that's the point,
one of the
Drew.
most.
That's the point, Drew. When I started saying I'm not happy with you at all.
But it's beautiful makeup effects. It's not real. We have to, like Julia, just remind yourself it's not real. It's only a movie.
But it's just a show. I should really just relax.
Yeah, I love this transformation, and this movie has a lot of good werewolf transformations in it. But this is probably a prize winner for one of the grossest werewolf transformations.
I agree.
Because he tears his face off, and then his skull is becoming like this animal skull.
It's horrific.
And
it's definitely an example of one of those examples of everybody just sitting around watching the transformation happen when they have plenty of time to get the hell out of the house.
Yes. Although because this is a story within a dream, I think we can kind of excuse it a little bit.
Yeah.
That's
the thing about this movie is that every time there's something ridiculous, you can go, oh, but it's a dream, so it's okay, which kind of annoyed me a little bit.
Right. Well, that's the problem.
Well, I did think about you when she didn't run out the door with her kids because of our discussion last week with the howling.
Exactly.
Now, the important thing here, though, is like this is high 80s horror here. We talked about this a little bit with the howling, but when anybody thinks about this particular decade of horror films, these kind of things are what they're talking about, with these just really bizarre animatronic and makeup effects. And this is a great example of that.
Yeah, because everything's practical. Everything's always being done by making something out of layers of latex and then pulling it apart or ripping it or pushing something through it. It's all relying on, okay, I've got this rig set up now, and now I'm going to live do the thing that the rig is supposed to do on camera, and then if we blow it, we're going to reset it and build it again and do all that.
But what's so fascinating about this is so awesomely original.
Yeah.
I mean, these transformations are okay. Like, we've seen this done this way. We saw Oliver Reed do it in Curse of the Werewolf. We've seen them many times before. We've got American Werewolf. We've got we have all these. We've got really all these pictures. Wow. How can we do this differently? It's like, okay, well, we're going to do this because it's really visceral, because it's, because it's, maybe it goes, allegorically somehow with the idea of you can't trust. And by the way, you should never trust a naked man in the woods. I just want to say that for the record. Lycanthropic folklore or not. But the idea that you go, okay, well, Angela Lansbury is basically saying that, telling the girl, really beware of all men. And even when she marries another man and she has kids, she's miserable, by the way, raising these kids. She's just bloody miserable. Yeah. And, the idea is these transformations, particularly this one, becomes like, to me it was like wolves in sheep's clothing. It was sort of like, taking the outer skin off, and then what's below the skin of a man really is what he really is, which is a beast.
Yeah, that's true.
And, and I thought it was really all that, but sort of, wrote large and in living color. And I thought it was incredibly original.
Well, the worst kind of wolves are furry on the inside.
Yeah.
That was very strange, and I don't know what exactly that. Oh, right, because it's a human skin and it's got fur on the inside. Because when these wolves come out, like in his case, the face comes off, the human face comes off, the rest of the head sort of deforms a little bit, but the rest, he just sort of punches his way out of the human body and kind of leaves it behind, like a locust husk, right?
Well, every time they do a werewolf transformation in this movie, they have 3 different transformations, and they're all different. That's the other thing that's really cool about this movie. They could have just stopped and done, one really tour de force werewolf transformation, but they go hole on the hog here, or hole on the wolf, I suppose I should say. And this particular story ends where the husband shows up, he lops the werewolf's head off, and it ends in the soup and turns back into a man's head.
Yeah, it lands in the milk, which makes me so sad, because that's like so much milk, and you know how much hard that must have been for them to acquire, get all that milk from the cow and everything. And
what I love about it, though, is she's still sad. You know, like
she sees the real husband, and she's like, wait,
yeah.
because he reverts back to his original face, like that he was when she knew him.
It's still sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the husband beats her, if I recall, and that's the end of that story. And so now we snap back. So we go, hey, this wasn't real. Don't worry. If you found that disturbing, don't worry. That was just a story that Grandma was telling to entertain, educate, whatever, her teenage
Little Red Riding Hood. We might as well just call her that.
Daughter.
Yeah,
That's who's now Little Red Riding Hood.
Thank you.
Yes, because Grandma gave her this red cloak, you know, which she's going to wear from then on out, you know, for most of the rest of the movie, you know, and so the next story comes along because I'm trying to think where we go next. I think this is the next one is the walk with the boy.
There's the whole business with the walk with the boy, and the boy tries to kiss her, and she runs into the woods, and then the boy discovers a cow has been slaughtered by wolves.
Oh, that's disturbing. My God. Yeah, because there's this slaughtered cow, and then there's a calf nearby that's just sort of lowing, and you go, whoa, you know, and so now we enter a more real narrative, because this is the narrative of the teenager. You know, David Warner. You know, she manages to make it back, but David Warner now is going to have to lead the clan, you know, the village against this live wolf, and so they do some wolf hunting. And while the women folk wait for the men to complete their hunt of this wild wolf out there, which, remember, is the wolf that killed Rosalind's older sister. The girl and her mom hang out, and Little Red Riding Hood, we can call her, tells yet another story, supposedly one that she heard from her grandma. She goes, hey, let me tell you a story while we're waiting. And this one is a story of, I don't know, Louis XIV France. It's basically, in this one, it's a fascinating little story. Julia, do you want to tell the Frenchified wolf story? Or whoever feels like I can run with it, just go ahead. So I'm not just
you go ahead.
Okay, very basically, you've got a peasant girl, very, very pregnant, who is walking towards this sumptuous banquet that's going on. And this banquet is...
Oh, right. Yeah, okay. No, I was like, for a second, I was like, what was the story? Yes, so the banquet, it was such a... This really was a dreamlike scene, because it takes place in this kind of, like, tent, pretty much, in the middle of...
Well, yeah, it's set up outside of the castle.
But it's so it's
But set outside the rich people's house from the real world.
Oh, is
it's
it?
The same house.
Funny, because in the world of this story, it looked to me like a great castle. But I suppose you're exactly right. It's yeah.
Anyway, but it's super brightly lit, and the people are dressed in this Napoleonic.
I'd call it Louis XIV.
Oh yeah, Louis XIV. Yeah, you're right. Louis XIV style, like clothes with the heart-shaped lipstick on all the men and women, and just the crazy big hair, and they're just all over the top. I mean, rude, just like very, very pretentious, very everything.
Piggish.
It's piggish. They're just exactly. Like they're the worst of the epitome of gluttony, and they've got all these servants, helping them whatever. And there's been a wedding, and so this very pregnant woman comes in and just starts, like everybody immediately knows who she is, of course, and she has to be the mistress of the groom because of how everybody's looking at her. And she's like, he used to like me, or whatever she says. I don't remember.
But I wasn't good enough for him.
But I wasn't good enough for him. I was good enough once and everything. And so then it turns out that she's basically a witch because she has the ability to, like, first she breaks the mirror with her mind, and then she turns everybody into werewolves. They'll start becoming wolves, and like just changing, except for the servants who just think that's hilarious. They're just standing around going, "This is awesome," and then all the wolves run off, and the servants are like, "Sweet, let's eat the food now."
Well, this has got like another really good, different transformation, though. The way they do it in this is much more, you're looking through the cracked mirror, and every time you see it, these people's faces are a little bit more wolfish, and then they'll do like a cutaway where you see claws popping through the people's hands or their shoes. And again, I just think it's really great that they chose. They could have just as easily stopped with the one, and each time they do something visually interesting. And I love the fact that you mostly see this through this cracked mirror.
Yeah, it's very strange, and there's all these ideas of the French Revolution and the different parties taking place. The different politics going on with of course, the servants are not going to do anything to help the nobility, and there are different classes among those who are overthrowing the nobility. And they pop champagne after everybody's been turned in the wolves. Absolutely, yeah. Well, and then it wraps up the witch, who's fantastic. She now lives upon a heath and occasionally calls upon all of the nobles who have been turned into wolves to come in and serenade her with their howling. Right, with her and the baby out in the woods. She's like got the baby in the treetop, basically. Such a nutso story. I mean, and so that is what this 13-year-old in the Middle Ages, while David Warner is out hunting the wolves, the 13-year-old is going, hey, I've been hanging out with Granny, and let me tell you another one. And so we cut to that. Now we're back. We're back to the Middle Ages, and it's about here that we have the third story, which is a story that Granny tells about a young man. This is a very, very quick story. There's very, very little to this, except for it's very interesting. Young man out walking in the woods, I can't remember what for, and... Well, he's going to meet the devil. Right. Why is he going to meet the devil? Because the devil shows up. He's going to sell his soul. He's going to sell his soul. Oh, yes. Well, he's going to sell his soul so he can be a werewolf. Okay. And when the devil appears... The devil appears in a car. Yes. Even though it's like whatever. It's General Zod himself, Terrence Stamp. General Zod himself, Terrence Stamp, yeah. Yeah. It's Terrence Stamp. He wanted Andy Warhol initially, and he was going to do it. And then he wasn't able to. Let me see. What did it say? I can't remember why it said he wasn't able to do it. Oh, I love the idea. Fly.
Yeah, Warhol couldn't do it because he said it was too weird for him.
It was too weird for him? No.
I would have sort of hated. I hate the idea of Andy Warhol, but I love the idea of Terrence Stamp. So that's where I'm at on this.
Wow. Yeah. Stamp is amazing.
Stamp's fantastic.
Oh, because he'd just been shot. That's right. Andy Warhol had just been shot, and so he was afraid for his life if he traveled. It wasn't about flying. It was about leaving his home.
There you go. So, yes, and it's Terrence Stamp, and Stamp is soundless but really interesting. And a girl who is, I believe, the same actress who plays the sleeping girl and the girl in the Middle Ages telling these stories with her grandmother, plays, in this case, the retainer of the devil. The devil is Terrence Stamp in a big white Rolls Royce, and he hands over, the magic potions to the boy and rides away. It is totally dreamy. It is so crazy that in this sort of D&D Middle Ages that into the woods rolls the devil in a 1930s Rolls Royce. Because why not?
Well, it's the way they play the headlights, at first you think it's going to be a big wolf, too.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I was totally confused. I was making a joke and thinking that it was a car, and then I thought, surely in a second that's going to be a wolf. And then, no, a Rolls Royce rolls right out and remember, of course, that this is a story being told by the Middle Ages girl, but remember, of course, that this is a dream being dreamt by
a modern-day girl.
Yeah, so why not? And that only leaves really one more story because, which is the coming back out to the Middle Ages, at least. So it leaves really two more stories, but one's quite short. But we missed an important thing. David Warner, and I actually feel like David Warner's kind of wasted in this movie. I feel like anybody could have played this part as much as I like David Warner. But David Warner comes back from the hunt with a severed wolf's paw that has been revealed to be a human hand.
And although I have to say I was cracking up the whole time. He kept talking about it was the biggest wolf I've ever seen, and they have these dogs that they painted to look like wolves. And there were wolves where I grew up, okay? And I can guarantee you, way bigger than any one of these dogs.
Yeah, the wolves here, whatever they are, they're not that scary. Although
they're Belgian shepherds that have been dyed.
But they look delightful when you've got like a whole bunch of them chasing through the girl in the woods, because they keep hitting this note over and over again. Don't diverge from the path, but the girls in this movie never listen, and so they're always being chased by.
In this movie, I love how you're like, in this movie. Does any child in any person in any movie ever listen to "Don't Diverge from the Path"?
Well, there you go.
I mean, heck, we just saw Jurassic World, and that's like one of the major things in that movie is that particular thing comes to play.
That's totally true. That's a good point. And I just now was thinking how awesome it would be to have a variation on that. Only it was a world where there were living monsters, but of course you had like a hamster ball so that they wouldn't be able to hurt you. But of course, that wouldn't go well. I love that idea. But okay, so yes, they determined that this was a werewolf that actually had killed the older sister, and but it's not the one that we meet next, because there's one last trip to Granny's. And this is where the movie gets very strange and asks us to accept a lot. A lot. It's where the movie almost becomes like I don't even know. It becomes so folkloric because we can't take the narrative literally at all anymore. Because Rosaline goes to visit her grandma one more time, but she is met upon the path by a huntsman, a very handsome, huntsman, who flirts with her and tries to kiss her and challenges her to that he can beat her to Grandma's house and all this stuff. And so we recognize all of this. I mean, he's the big bad wolf. There's no mystery about that at all. It's interesting, though, to me that the big bad wolf is the huntsman, because I always hear these stories, and there's the two characters, the wolf and the huntsman. But in this case, they're a merged character. And he does get to Grandma's first, and he murders Grandma. Well, for the love of God, we've been following Grandma this whole time, and she's been this snippy woman who tells stories and says, don't trust naked men in the woods and other useful things like that. And now we watch this guy walk in and murder her.
That's like a Fletcher, for crying out loud.
Yeah. So what's the deal here? I mean, in other words, is it that this is all supposed to be Freudian and that there was a time of the grandma?
Well, the grandmother represents chastity. She's the one that's like kind of urging you to stay in your childlike state. Whereas werewolves in this movie, all of them kind of represent sex and adulthood and oncoming maturity. Completely. And, especially this particular werewolf. And when he murders the grandmother, she literally comes apart like a doll. And which makes that sort of tie to her wanting to keep you childlike very literal.
Yeah, what's interesting is I agree with that. There's another thing too, and that is Granny kept also saying stick to the path and everything else. And there's a whole bit where it seems really apparent, like at this point, that Granny never really dared to stray away from the path, and she submitted to masculine authority and control, and kind of left her alone. And she's like by the fire, and that's kind of it. So all she could do was sort of knit and tell stories to this girl. So it seems like it's almost saying this persistent belief in in staying on the correct path.
Yeah.
In Granny's case, it's really her undoing. It's really this thing where, because she's been the sister who says, "Don't stray from the path. Don't stray." She would never stray from the path, and because of it, she's, I think she becomes a victim. I think she is an example of, even though you're supposed to not stray from the path, she's consumed. I mean, she's killed.
She falls apart.
Yeah, and that whole thing, I mean, that bothered me because, again, it's just a dream, so it's okay. But her whole acceptance of her grandmother, even if it is what you're saying, it still feels just
the grandmother's
really
the only one that doesn't exist in the real world.
Right. This is true. This truly is a dream where the grandmother, we have to, at this point in the movie, make our peace with the fact that the grandmother was, in a sense, never really there. That she was a talking avatar for childhood, and now it's being replaced with a talking avatar.
I hear you, but I mean, it's still a character,
adulthood.
and it still sucks that
right.
killed her,
still,
and then
the problem is
the girl's kind of like, okay.
Right, it's Angela Lansbury. We just watched her, and now so that is a problem with telling a story that is both going to be a Freudian metaphor and an actual narrative, because the two things may not match up in what we expect from the story being told.
You know, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying, Julia. Believe me, on some level, it does bother me. Like I said, I feel like the narrative aspect of this movie is lacking in a lot of respects. I feel like they do choose style over substance in some cases, and certainly in the cases with this particular, certainly in the case of this particular character. But I mean, she was gonna. This is Little Red Riding Hood. She was gonna die one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, like
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah, but it's not about whether she dies. It's about how the girl reacts to it. I mean,
well, she kind of reacts a little bit. I mean, she doesn't get as upset.
She's like, "Oh, you killed my grandmother. That's her hair or whatever it is, like, right?"
Is that all that you left of her?
Reaction.
There was no reaction. I mean, I don't think
there was no
reaction. The movie at this point is like the girl is about to grow up. She's going to join in a sexual union with this wolf dancer, and
the guy's actually a dancer. He was actually hired to choreograph the transformation, and then they ended up using him because they liked his dancing so much.
He was great. No,
I feel like he was a guy that cast because he was interesting looking. Because I don't actually think he's a very good actor. Like his delivery.
The thing. I'm telling you, they didn't cast him to cast him. They chose him as a choreographer, and then they were like, they said he was so interesting. It says Misha Borghese was originally hired to work as choreographer specifically to help Stephen Rea and as the as-yet uncast part of the Huntsman with the physicality of their performances. However, director Neil Jordan was so impressed with Borghese's grasping of the themes of the project and with his look and movement that he offered the role to him.
That's precisely it.
And
you're right.
Visually, that's the right decision, I guess. But like his line delivery is very flat.
True. But gosh, when he's moving around like
no, his body language is great. His body language is great.
He has all the acting chops of a porn star, but that's okay. You know, he again is a metaphorical character. It's fine. So what happens at that point? Everybody has realized that there's a wolf at Granny's house. Everybody comes running, and
this has got the best transformation in the whole movie too, because like again he opens up his mouth.
Oh. Yes.
And a wolf mouth comes out. This is the thing that everybody remembers. If you grew up in the 80s or 90s and you saw this movie on TV, that is the thing that you remembered about this movie, was the wolf mouth coming out of the human mouth. And it's, again, this movie has already had two great werewolf transformations in it, and this one is very... like tour de force. It's so memorable and so crazy.
Yeah. But when you see it on the cover, you think it's just it's sort of metaphorical. It's like, these people turn into wolves. How could this happen? And then you see the first transformations, and you're thinking, oh, these are great. And then when it actually happens, you're like, oh shit, this really happened. I can't believe this happened. And it is amazing. It's really striking. I think
do you remember
amazing transformations?
It reminds me a lot, and I think it kind of got lifted just a few years later in Tales from the Dark Side. Remember when the cat comes out of David Johansen's mouth, and it's a similar effect. Really amazing. Yeah, I mean so that's beyond amazing. So now I'm glad you stopped us to remember that. So now anyway, the father representing, the home and authority breaks in with the posse and the mom, And all that is left in this place, of course, is a wolf wearing Rosalie's necklace.
Two wolves.
Doesn't the, I think...
werewolf number 1 jumps through the window.
Yeah, he's already split, leaving the other, and the mom says, no, don't shoot her, because she realizes, hey, that's our daughter, she has
transformed. She's wearing the cross around her neck.
She's wearing the cross, and so she disappears and goes away. And that's really wonderful. It's this notion of full transformation into adulthood, and the mother is the one who recognizes it, while the father, who always fights against the immaturity of his children, is slower to recognize it. And that's great. I think that's really
interesting, Jason. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Well, thank you.
I guess you have to be a father of a 13-year-old to have that particular realization.
Sure. And now something very strange happens, which is that we move out to the 80s, to David Warner's giant-ass house, and Sarah Patterson is still asleep. She's the framing story. But now, does anybody want to describe what happens at this point in the close of the framing story?
I think Drew should.
Well, a wolf shatters through the window.
Yeah.
Which I guess is to imply that on some level all this stuff was real, which is confusing. Oh, we skipped over a story.
That's actually to me, that was, despite what I was saying, to me, that was actually the most predictable part. Because at the beginning I said, well, I'm sure this is going to be just like those, like the Twilight Zone thing where he's got sand in his pocket after he gets voted. Like, I felt like there had to be something that was going to tie it back.
Yeah, it is very common for the dream to come back, although it's you can always also say, well, this is still a dream. This is still yet another dream, only she's dreaming now of her world. Yeah. But, her whole world gets taken over by the dream world. The house transforms. It's completely, and she ends up being pursued by many wolves. But since in this movie, the pursuit of wolves is usually about growing up and puberty and all that stuff, I think we still can go ahead and take it as pure ballet and means nothing. This girl is not going to be eaten by wolves in 1984. This is yet another symbol we're looking at.
We actually skipped over a story.
Yeah, we did. Okay, I'm sorry.
Although it's not much of one. So there's the story of a she-wolf or a female werewolf that comes out of a well from the world below, which I guess supposed to imply is hell or the underworld or whatever, and is shot. Is shot and turns into a human girl and is rescued by a priest.
Yeah.
And Ben just decides to go back to when she came.
It's a story that takes up like 4 minutes.
That was just basically it was like a little modern dance piece is what that was.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to it. It doesn't really add anything. I think out of all of the...
Artistic.
It's just sort of there.
It reminds me a lot of these... you said modern dance, Joya, and it reminds me a lot of like in the old Gene Kelly musicals. He always had these sequences where they would do a big ballet in the middle that told a second story, and it was just like, and now, ladies and gentlemen, ballet. And so then, and they would just do another story, and you would watch, and then eventually, once it was done, you would go back to the main narrative, and that's what this is. This is like this just little dance sequence about this werewolf girl. And she crawls back into the well. That's the amazing thing. I mean, at the end, she goes back in the well. It's like a music video in here. Thank you for bringing... I mean, good Lord. If you're listening to this show and you haven't actually seen this movie, I'm trying to figure out what in the hell you're going to think about this movie from our very strange description of it.
It's a weird description of a weird movie.
It is a very weird movie.
And I got, hey, look, that's why I wanted us to do it. So.
Oh yeah, no, I'm very glad.
I'm glad you did.
Glad. All right, we should get our final thoughts about The Company of Wolves, and then come around for endorsements. and I have a late breaking one that actually was just a shock to me as it came across my computer. So, but somebody else may hit it as well, so it doesn't matter. All right, so final thoughts, and we went Drew, Julia, Adam, Jason. So, Drew, what are your final thoughts about The Company of Wolves?
This is a movie that I really wanted us to discuss when we came back to the topic of werewolves. There was a very real temptation after the death of Christopher Lee to do The Howling 2, and I batted that back and forth with Jason over email for a few days, and ultimately I went back to this, and I'm very glad that I did, because I knew it would give us a lot to talk about, and I feel like that's definitely been true. And this is such an oddball, interesting movie. It's not anyone's idea of like a classic werewolf movie. It's very different, and I think we've done now more or less all, with the exception of maybe I Was a Teenage Werewolf or something, we've done most of the iconic werewolf movies. So I kind of wanted to get a little oddball cult classic type film in, and I'm really glad that we did this episode. And I know we got one more in the tank on this subject, but I just wanted to thank y'all prematurely and say thank you for indulging me on this subject.
Well, it's been a delight. Julia, what are your final thoughts on The Company of Wolves?
Well, the thing is, I'm all for films that go out, outside the box, or that mess with reality. But this one just didn't, to me, didn't do it right. It didn't do it the way I like anyway. And so I don't know. There were some things I liked in it, but mostly I just felt like either I didn't like the transformations that much. I thought they were pretty grotesque. Although I do agree with you, Drew, about the mirror thing with the woman that's turning them all. That was kind of interesting. That one was very different from the others, and I think I liked that one the most just because it was so bizarre. But there were some things I liked and some things I was definitely turned way off by. But I'm, like I said, happy that Angela Lansbury is in it. I'm happy that Terrence Stamp is in it. I think it's always interesting to watch something that messes with, what you usually think about that genre of film, because then you have something to compare it to next time.
No, that's a really, really good point. That, yeah, it gives you the ability to go, well, this is a different kind of spy movie. I don't like it as much, but it's given me a way to think about spy movies or whatever. So, yeah. Adam, The Company of Wolves, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I think we've all said it in one form or another. It's definitely an unusual picture. It's very weird. It's very, it definitely breaks, it stays faithful to certainly some conventions, particularly, when it comes to the mythology. But it sort of breaks a lot of other conventions, particularly when it comes to the genre, this sort of genre of picture, this genre of film. But I think what about this film I do like is the fact that perhaps that it is so different. The fact that it isn't run of the mill. You can't say that it's boring. You can't say like, oh my God, it's dull and it's entirely. It goes down all the same tired roads that they've all gone down before. It's very fantastic in the sense that it's very surreal and very unusual. And if you like fantasy mixed with your horror, I think this is definitely a film for you. And I think I'm glad I saw it, having not seen it before. And the other thing I could say is, and this is probably sacrilegious in some way, but there are certain movies that don't translate well, or they don't necessarily hold up as well from the 80s. I tried watching Labyrinth not too long ago, and I personally had real trouble going back to Labyrinth. It really felt to me like it was cemented with big cement galoshes in the East River in the 1980s, and it just sank there. And I couldn't, the cutting and the style and kind of everything else just made it impenetrable to me now. But this is, I could see this as a film from the 80s, and it definitely feels like it was like it's shot that way, cut that way, film stock, a lot of filters, a lot of those things. But in a lot of ways, it seems still accessible. It seems no matter where you come to this picture from, whether it's a fan of the genre or whether you're sort of newish to the genre or you like fantasy, wherever you come at it, you're all kind of coming at it with this sense of kind of being on your left foot, because it approaches all these things so differently, and all these metaphors are at work in it, and you're picking them out, picking them apart, and trying to follow the narrative. We're all in this sort of collective experience of Company of Wolves, no matter where we come from. It's just an interesting experience that we're all kind of sharing. I think you're right, Drew. It was definitely worth bringing into the discussion because there's really so much to talk about. I think we've talked about pictures that some of us has really just all out hated.
Yeah.
To Julia, but and we've been divided before. But this is one of those ones that you can't just say, look, I wanted to turn the thing off and I was done with it because I just gave up. It kept my attention. I was definitely interested. Yeah. So, thanks for that. Thanks for showing me something new.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And I think that was really good.
Thank you. That's wonderful. First of all, really quickly, the Lars von Trier movie that I mentioned earlier that takes place on a soundstage is Dogville. Anyway, so I'll picking up on what Adam said. There are many movies from 30 years ago that I find really difficult to watch that you figured were wonderful, but you actually find it now, and there's just something wrong that just makes it difficult to take on as a piece of art anymore. People were talking about Christopher Lee dying, and they were saying, greatest roles of Christopher Lee, and everybody always wants to talk about Scaramanga from The Man with the Golden Gun, and I think all those people have not attempted to watch The Man with the Golden Gun recently, because Jesus Christ, that is an impossible movie to struggle through. It's just one of the most dreadfully if you can figure out a way to make James Bond boring, that movie does it. I mean, God, I'm surprised it didn't kill the series after that. So, Christopher Lee might be great in it, but you're asleep by the time he shows up. Also, it has Hervé Villechaize, always doing well.
Ghislaine.
Yes. People are going to write in and just say, I didn't listen to the rest of the show, but you're damn wrong about The Man with the Golden Gun. But I really did. I loved this movie. There's very few movies that really earn the name oniric, but this definitely is one. It gives us, and it's an anthology. Really, when you get down to it, it's a werewolf anthology. That's pretty cool. So, I think considering that it's quite short, so even if you're going to experiment, it's not a long experiment. It's 90 minutes of your life, and it's very interesting. So I'm happy that I watched it. I never would have watched it otherwise, and I'm also really thankful to Drew for introducing it to us.
You're welcome again.
Oh, absolutely. So, and next week, by the way, is going to be also quite awesome. We're going to be talking about Dog Soldiers, which is a really great werewolf movie from.
And it's a different werewolf movie in a very different way than this one is. Absolutely.
I love Dog Soldiers. I think I've been heavily influenced in my own writing by Dog Soldiers, probably more than anything else. I've never thought about it, but I think that's absolutely true. So that's next week. Let's do our endorsements for this week. What are you listening to? What do you want to tell people about? Same direction, Drew, Julia, Adam, and then I'll say something. Drew, anything to endorse this week?
Well, they just put up the second season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on Netflix. Now, I sort of hastily endorsed the first season when that was on Netflix. And that season, it's one of those things, if you're going to start watching the show, you have to know that you're going to be initially not enthralled by it, which I said that I never would have become a fan of the show if I had not watched on Netflix, and I couldn't just kind of have it on the background when I was doing housework or whatever. However, by the end of the first season, it kind of really kicked its game up. They had Bill Paxton guest star for several episodes. It ended up being really good. The second season basically just hits the ground running. It's got tons of Marvel mythology in it. It has Hydra. It has Mr. Hyde. It has Inhumans. they've expanded the cast. It's gone from being like a mediocre show to, something. I really do feel like Marvel Studios hadn't quite figured out TV. And, between this season and Daredevil, I'm just thinking, man, Marvel's getting as good, honestly better. I've enjoyed this, and I enjoyed Daredevil more than I liked Age of Avengers. I really, really, really loved Daredevil, and I'm really, really, really enjoying the second season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. It has a lot of good actors in it. It has Kyle MacLachlan, it has Edward James Olmos.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just really digging it so far. And they introduced Mockingbird. Like, of all the random Marvel characters, they throw a Mockingbird in. As I mentioned also previously, Kyle MacLachlan plays the Marvel version of Mr. Hyde, and he's great.
Wow,
so that's my endorsement.
That's fantastic. I think it's wonderful. Thank you very much. All right, Julia, do you have anything to endorse this week?
Oh, yes, I have to endorse Jurassic World. I know I probably sound like a broken record for everybody else's endorsement, but it's so freaking scary. Oh, my God. Like, I've been watching all these horror movies with you guys and finding myself less and less frightened by them. But apparently dinosaur movies are still going to be the thing.
I would love to do all 4 Jurassic Park movies.
Yeah, I think we need to do a Jurassic
I couldn't do it right. I'm writing for a Canadian horror website right now, and they made me promise that I would have to wait a few months between doing something on here or doing something for them, and I just did all of the Jurassic Park movies, including Jurassic World, for them, and I have to even hold off on saying what my opinion on Jurassic World is.
Oh, no. Well, we can't wait to find out when you are at liberty to say. Top secret opinions about Jurassic World. I didn't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I thought it was great fun. Oh, my gosh, I was just jumping out of my seat. The dinosaurs are amazing. I don't think there was a single moment or second in that film when I thought to myself, wow, these are really good special effects. I mean, they're just dinosaurs. There are just dinosaurs there. Somehow there are dinosaurs. Don't know where they are, that they were able to film them, but they found them and there they are. And it was a lot of fun. And then the big bad of the movie is just awesome. It was just very, very wonderful. So I definitely highly endorse it.
Wow.
Yeah, the Frankenstein dinosaur is. I will say this. I'm not going to go full because I legally can't. But I do feel like the fact that they had, like, to me, Jurassic Park has always been the fusion of Frankenstein and King Kong, and that they finally made that. They just went out and made that literal with that character.
Yeah, they totally did.
Lovely. Very cool. Adam, do you have anything to endorse for us this week?
Well, it's funny. I was going to throw Jurassic World on the fire as well. I can't say that I was as affected maybe as Julia, because you sound incredibly excited. But I thought it was really terrific. I thought it was the kind of thing that there's Jurassic Park, and then there was everything else. And however you feel about all of that, in one way or another. And then there was this, and this to me felt like a very worthy successor to Jurassic Park. It wasn't Jurassic Park, but it didn't need to be. It had to be something else. So I think they did a remarkably good job. Highly, highly entertaining. Really, really enjoyed it. But now that Julia's done it, I really can't add a whole lot to it. Plus, we got to wait for Drew's gag order to come off before we.
I'm fuming right now. Just man, we're gonna have to do all of those.
And I think that's fair. I think that's a great idea, because I think those would all be good. These would all be pictures. Except you might say that these are movies, depending on which one you're talking about. But I'm going to say in this case, because I can't throw Jurassic World on, I'm going to say that I caught something on Netflix, bringing up Netflix again, that I rather liked, and it was Captain Harlock. which was an old Japanese space pirate animation piece that was floating around for a long time, but it's been done now as a feature, and it's on Netflix. I have to say, highly entertaining. You know, if you like that, genre, if you like that character, if you like that world, it was surprisingly interesting. It's on Netflix now, and I happened to catch it. It was recommended to me. It was very random, and I really liked it. There's lots of little dents, like a lot of Japanese stuff is at times, or French stuff sometimes. But it was very accessible and very fun. The effects were good. It was actually really good animation. It's definitely worth seeing, Captain Harlock.
I would love to see a live-action version of Captain Harlock. I remember that from the 80s.
You know, I'm surprised with the obsession after Pirates of the Caribbean, they didn't do that.
Huh.
Yeah, me too.
So I have two endorsements. One is a soundtrack that I came across very recently by John Barry from 1960, 60, called Beat Girl, and it's about a wayward youth crime kind of story, but it has this wonderful beatnik jazz score that has a very spy feel because it's John Barry prior to writing the James Bond stuff, so it's a very unique sound, and I really have been enjoying it. So that's Beat Girl from 1960. The other thing I should mention is if you get the chance, you should go back and listen to the Star Trek II soundtrack, which is my favorite thing from James Horner, who just passed away today, actually, and that's a shock. I literally had no idea. And so yes, apparently Horner died in a plane crash, and
oh my God!
So I know it's literally. I mean, I don't know where we would be without the soundtrack of Star Trek II, and I think he did the Raiders March, and it's just
Titanic and Braveheart, according to the
Jesus
blurb.
Yeah, so that's just amazing. But to me the Star Trek II theme, that whole da 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 da, he took what had been a really boring soundscape for a long time and gave it this amazing new sort of naval feel. Just amazing stuff. So we're remembering James Horner tonight. All right. I am very excited about the end of this werewolf set because we're going to do Dog Soldiers next week, and it's going to be awesome. I thank you guys for being on. I thank everybody who's listening for listening. Come to the Facebook page, leave comments, leave questions, and we will engage with you totally. Leave reviews on iTunes and everything else. Thank you so much, and we will see you next week. Thanks, guys.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thanks, everyone. Night.